All right, so why do we dream? Well, I wish I could say why we dream, but all I can say is there are three different theories on it. So let me introduce the three theories. Probably one of them or two of them might sound like the more logical ones to you, and one or two might fall by the wayside in your mind. But you just need to know all three of them. So we have Freuds theory on the left. I've got him on the left. I'm going to talk about him first because his is the first real theory that was advanced to try and explain why we dream. Then we have the information processing theory in the middle, and then we have the activation synthesis hypothesis on the right. Okay, let's start with Freud's theory, the oldest, grandest theory. Freud believed that our dreams are a form of wish fulfillment, that the content of our dreams reveals what we really unconsciously want. According to Freud, and we're going to talk about him more when we get to personality theory, I'll really outline his theory and tell you, all the details. But the basic gist of Freud's theory is that we have our conscious mind and our unconscious mind, and that housed in our unconscious mind is all the stuff that we're embarrassed of or that we think is inappropriate or whatever, and we place it into this unconscious status and try and pretend like it's not our impulse or pretend like it's not what we want. So during dreaming, those unconscious desires come bubbling forth and appear in our consciousness. Now, the unconscious is supposed to be holding this information a secret from our conscious brain, according to Freud. It's too unbearable for us to know the truth about what our impulses and our desires are, so we need to keep it in an unconscious place. But if you've ever held a juicy secret, you know how hard it is to hold a juicy secret. I've been known to hold juicy secrets longer if I let complete strangers know what the secret is that I'm holding. I've got some friend's piece of information that I'm not supposed to tell, so I'll blurt out to the cashier at the grocery store that my friend who lives in another state has whatever exciting piece of news I'm not supposed to tell anybody. And then I'll feel better, and then I can talk to mutual friends and not blurt it out by accident, right? By relieving that pressure, by telling a stranger, I have better willpower when I'm talking to a mutual friend. Freud thinks that our dreams are kind of like that for our unconscious. Our dreams are a way for our unconscious to leak out the secret to the only person that the unconscious knows, which is us, our conscious mind. Leak it out a little bit, but in a way that the unconscious thinks you'll never figure out, that the conscious brain will never figure out what this is really about. So our dreams are leaked out in a story that represents what Freud calls the manifest content of the dream. So you have a dream, you experience the themes and the images and the meaning and stuff of the dream. That's the manifest content. But hidden in that dream are symbols that mask the latent content, the real content of the dream, the real message. To bring this to life, I'm going to tell you a little dream that one of my students once told me. I beg my in-person students not to tell me their dreams because I don't like hearing people's dreams. It's a deep-rooted problem I have. I don't like to hear people's dreams, and I'm not trained in it. So why are you telling me anyway? And stuff. So I always tell my students, don't tell me your dreams. But I had a student, the first quarter I ever taught, he did not believe me apparently. He's like, no, I have one for you that there's no way Freud could make anything out of this dream. So he tells me his dream. And then I said, okay, there are two things I'm going to say before I interpret your dream. One, because you defied me, you now have given me permission to say this dream into perpetuity. And he goes, okay, yeah, that's fine with me. So I got his permission. It was under duress, but I got his permission to tell this dream. And then two, I said, okay, you got to be prepared that there are different ways to interpret your dream. So I'm going to start with one and we'll move on. He's like, okay. Okay, so here's his dream. As he enters the dream, he's visualizing a military airplane. As he described it, I came to the conclusion it was like a C-130, prop, big plane. And he sees it from the outside first and recognizes that it's a military plane. He came to the conclusion it was Army. And then all of a sudden he's inside the plane. And he realizes, oh my gosh, I'm going to parachute jump. Look, all these other guys are here. They all have their parachutes on. One by one, they're jumping out the door. And you know how dreams are. So he's like inside the airplane, but he can also see the guys outside with their parachutes expanded and going down. He's like, oh my God, I get to parachute jump. This is great. So he's really excited about that. But then he saw everybody else is sort of adjusting their straps and stuff. So he looks down to his parachute and he's going to adjust his straps, do what everybody else is doing, and then he realizes all of a sudden this is not a parachute backpack. He's wearing like a camel bag or something on his back. He's like, what is this? So he has this moment of, oh my God, no. Then he looks around at everybody else and he realizes, wait, they aren't wearing parachutes either, but they're all holding rulers in their hands. So now when he sees the people who are jumping out, the new guys who are jumping out, they aren't jumping out with parachutes. He sees them holding a ruler in each hand, and the rulers are sort of guiding them down through the sky and slowing their descent. And so he's like, I guess this is some kind of new parachute, I guess. Okay. So he looks down into his hands and realizes, oh good, oh thank goodness, I also have rulers. Okay, I am prepared. But then he becomes aware of the fact that everybody else's rulers are made out of metal and his rulers are made out of wood. So he has, again, that moment of terror when he realizes he's got the wrong equipment. So, you know, people are jumping out one after the next, and it's finally his turn to jump out of the door of the aircraft, and of course that's when he wakes up. So we never find out how exactly his jump went. So he kind of laughingly challenged me. He goes, what could Freud possibly make out of that? Now I'm going to tell you guys a secret I did not tell him, which is that I only know 2 Freudian symbols for interpreting the latent content. It's not because I wasn't taught more symbols, it's because I knew I wasn't into dream interpretation, so I forgot all but the most interesting symbols. So I know the symbols for penis and I know the symbols for vagina. Okay, so penis will be anything that is rigid, anything that is like a snake, anything that's male. Those are all symbols for penises. And then anything that is hollow, like a tube, or has water rushing through it, or has an open circle, those are all vaginas. Okay, so now that you know the 2 symbols that I know, obviously there's only one way I can really interpret his dream, right? Because all I can do is focus on anything that's like a penis or like a vagina. So I told him, well, what Freud would say, which, remember, I don't know if this is what Freud would say because he knows more symbols than I do. What Freud would say is, okay, so you start looking at the plane from the outside, and what do you see but a long, hard shaft of the airplane? So obviously that's a gigantic penis. Then you're inside of it. So now it's a hollow tube. So now you're inside the vagina, right? And you look around, there's all these other men there. So there's a bunch of penises that are around you, right? And they're all jumping through the door, which is an open circle. So they're all jumping through the vagina. And you're excited to jump through the vagina with them. You want to go too. But then you realize you don't have the proper equipment for jumping through the vagina. But then you realize, well, everybody's got rulers instead of parachutes, so, oh good, I have the right equipment, I also have rulers, except for then you suddenly realize, hold on, they all have rulers made out of a harder material than you have. They have harder penises than you do. So then you start to feel inadequate again about jumping through the vagina. So, of course, everybody is just cracking up at this guy. I mean, what a horrible interpretation, right? I mean, that is, I took a certain amount of pleasure because I told that guy not to tell me his dream. I gave him 2 chances not to tell me his dream. So, I mean, that's a horrible interpretation. His poor face was going to explode with the bright redness that was generated as I was telling the story. So then after we all had a good laugh at his expense, I said, okay, now remember there are other interpretations. So let me give you another interpretation. So before I move on to the other interpretation, I will explain to you guys the information processing theory. The information processing theory says that the function of dreams is to give us an opportunity to sort out the day's events. It gives us an opportunity to organize information so that we can store it more effectively in our long-term memory. One of the things that's nice about the information processing theory is that it gives us an explanation for why we have the same dream many times across our lifespan. I mean, you might have dreamt something when you were little and then revisited that same basic dream again when you were older. This theory says that you do that because as you're storing information in your long-term memory, you might inadvertently activate certain neurons that are going to be involved in the storage of that memory, and that triggers your brain to make up the same story again. Because we're really not all that creative, right? So we're like, oh wow, I've seen this story before, let's watch it again, right? So you make up the same basic story, and that's what is a recurring dream. So I asked the student if he had any upcoming changes in his life, anything that maybe he might be nervous about. And he said that he was getting ready, this was a student at Green River Community College, and he said he was getting ready to start next quarter at the University of Washington as a transfer student. And I said, you know, the thing is, the information processing theory also invokes symbols to help make our dreams a little bit more interesting. Not to mask the content per se, but just to make it so that you're not sitting there worrying about something all day and then having the same exact thoughts all night. So in the information processing theory, jumping off into the unknown might be represented by parachute jumping. And being worried about your ability to measure up against your competition at a new school might be represented by having rulers made out of different material than everybody else had. So I said the information processing theory might say that you were dreaming about your concern that you're not as well prepared for the coursework that you're going to encounter as your classmates maybe who spent their freshman and sophomore years at the University of Washington. He liked that interpretation a lot better. He was like, oh yeah, that one makes way more sense. I definitely like that one better. And a lot of people prefer the information processing theory because you have that same symbolic component where you can say that maybe your dreams might seem strange until you break them down and understand maybe what they might really be trying to tell you. But then they don't have that part where it's all a secret and you've got unconscious impulses and all these things that Freud says. So that's our second theory, the idea that you're storing information and when you're storing a new memory, you're working in a neural network, and that can trigger recurring dreams. And that you might dream about stuff that you're worried about during the daytime. Now, since I don't like to hear other people's dreams, I'll tell you one of mine. This is why I don't like hearing people's dreams, though, because I keep them short and sweet. So I'm not going to tell you extraneous fluff. Here's the gist. When I was pregnant with my first child, I had a series of dreams that were basically starring me as the mom who forgot she had a baby. So, like, the first dream was, as I was leaving the hospital, I was checking out at the nursery, and I couldn't find my receipt for the baby. And they wouldn't let me take my baby home. The second one in that same genre was I flew home to see my family in California, from Albuquerque, and when I got off the plane, they're all, where's the baby? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot her. And I had to fly home and to retrieve the baby, and I discovered her on the changing table having dehydrated into the consistency of a potato chip. So when I picked her up, she just broke up into a million pieces. These are the kinds of dreams I was having when I had my first child, because obviously my concern was that I was going to be a horrible mother. I mean, it doesn't take Freud to interpret these themes, right? Pretty funny. But I see that my daughter just told me a big elaborate dream the other day, and I told her, I hate hearing dreams. She goes, no, but you got to hear this one. And it went on so long. Why? I don't need to hear all the vagaries of the dream. Just tell me the gist, right? I'm very much a gist person. This final theory, the activation synthesis theory, you can see I picked a picture of the brain with stimulation coming up from the brainstem, because the idea in this theory is that you've got random stimulation while you're sleeping and you're in the REM stage that comes up from the brainstem, passes through your limbic system, maybe hitting the amygdala and activating a sensation of fear or anger, and then lands in the cortex, where the cortex tries to account for what it's experiencing. So the cortex makes a story up. Remember, when you're dreaming, when you're in REM sleep, you don't have information coming in through your ears or your eyes or anything, right? You're paralyzed. You're not collecting information from the environment. But your brain can't go unstimulated. Your brain can't sit there with no incoming information or any activity going on, or else you'll start killing off neurons because you'll think you're not using them. So periodically there are bursts of activity that come up from the brainstem, and sometimes they pass through the limbic system and pick up some emotional content. And then your cortex tries to figure out, why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling like this? So a stimulus comes up, hits the amygdala, picks up some fear connotation, lands in the cortex, and you come to the conclusion you're being chased. And so you try and run. Now remember, in REM sleep, you're paralyzed. So your motor strip is yelling, run, as hard as it can. But you've got that switch flipped in the thalamus, and you can't send that message down to your body. So your motor cortex is trying, right? You've had these experiences. It's like running in mud in your dream, right? And you're trying so hard to run, but you can't. Why am I running? Because I'm scared. Why am I scared? According to this theory, it's because random stimulation came up from the brainstem, activated the amygdala, and now you suddenly, inexplicably, are scared. So your cortex says, I must be being chased. So that's the idea, is that there's no coherence to your dreams in the activation synthesis hypothesis. Instead, it's just you making stuff up. The beauty of this theory is it really accounts for these random things that happen in dreams, where you're walking down the street and then the dog talks to you, and then you can fly, and then suddenly you're at grandma's house, and like all this stuff happens, right? All these random things happen. This theory accounts for that by saying your brainstem sent up a new burst of activity, so your brain just made up a new, it doesn't care about continuity, it just starts explaining why it's feeling like that now. Well, now I'm feeling like this, make up a story. Oh, well now I'm having this experience. So it doesn't have to be coherent. You're just making stuff up. With the activation synthesis hypothesis, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that research has shown that when you're in REM sleep, if we wake you up during a REM stage, which like I mentioned is really hard, but if we wake you up and then ask you to do a word association task, you're better at it having just been woken up from REM sleep than you are if we ask you to do it while you're fully awake, or if we wake you up during some other stage of sleep. So you are better at putting words together and making things make sense when you're REM sleeping than you are at any other time in your day. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that you would make up stories on the fly so easily during REM stage, because you're primed to do it during the REM stage. Interestingly, research has also shown that when you're experiencing periods of heavy learning, when you're really trying to like memorize things for class, or it's final exam period or whatever, so you're doing a lot of studying, you engage in more REM sleep than you do during other times of the year, like summer when you maybe aren't taking classes. That really supports the information processing theory, the idea that when you're busy doing a lot of new learning, you do more REM sleep. So we have a lot of research there's a lot of research that supports those two different theories. Not a lot of research that supports Freud's theory. Freud's theory is interesting. A lot of people like it. A lot of people think that you can analyze a dream and get insight into a person's psyche, but there's not a lot of research that supports that. And so of these three theories, the information processing and the information synthesis is where most psychological research projects are focusing right now. Okay, so that was unsatisfying. Why do we dream? I'm not really sure, but those are the theories. Okay, let's go ahead and stop here, and in the next segment we'll pick up with a different state of consciousness. We'll talk about hypnosis.